It's Thursday, February 13th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me for our first official offseason podcast is the one and only, my good friend, Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, Matt. Looking forward to talking to you. Congratulations on a great couple of weeks of Super Bowl content. I was a consumer of much of that. It was better than the game, unfortunately, but that's what we get sometimes. And there is no offseason in the NFL. You know that better than anybody. You are making your combine plans right now as we speak. So a lot to unpack. And I'm just excited as a New England fan. You got my Whalers hat on. You know, the Red Sox just made a big move in free agency. The Patriots have done a lot of things that I like. So it's just, New England's been tough for New England sports teams in recent years. So it's just nice to see these upstarts like the Red Sox and Patriots getting back in the game.
Yeah, I love to see it. Downtrodden franchises for a long, long time here, especially those New England Patriots. We're going to be discussing those New England Patriots here on our show because, as I said, we are kicking off our offseason content calendar with our offseason question series. So next episode, we're going to talk about the NFC. Today, we're doing 16 fantasy offseason questions for these 16 AFC teams. And at the end of the pod, you're going to hear some of that pre-Super Bowl content that Scott mentioned. You're going to hear my one-on-one interview with Nico Collins, Texans wide receiver. Before I just want to let you know this, Scott, and prime the listeners for this. I think Nico Collins, if we're ranking the non-diva number one wide receivers in the league, I actually think Nico Collins is the 101 pick. That guy is awesome. He is like a real, just down to earth guy. Like anything you think about, like, number one wideouts, this, that, and the other. Nico Collins is not that. So much so that he showed up to the interview with no sponsor. You know, it's typically, Scott, these guys are coming up with like, I'm here for Gatorade and all these great and wonderful products. Nico Collins just coming by to chit chat. That guy was great.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear any of that. Being in the greater Detroit area, I fell in love with him at the University of Michigan, and he's obviously been such a fun fantasy player. And, it's just never a surprise to me when the best athletes are the smartest athletes or the most thoughtful athletes. And, Nico Collins is just checking all those boxes. So it's glad that you made a connection with him. And, I'm looking forward to hearing that interview at the end of this show.
Incredibly thoughtful guy. Yeah, it just occurred to me when I mentioned to one of the producers, like, oh yeah, he doesn't have a sponsor. They're like, well, I guess he's trying to get his name out there, and it's just, that's crazy. A guy who might be top 5 at his position, he's got to try to get his name out there, because I do still feel like we in like fantasy community, the smart football community, we all know how good Nico Collins is, but it does feel like he's still a little bit slept on in kind of like the national radar and stuff like that. So
you're going to need an early pick for him in fantasy next year. I think he's going to be right around the turn, maybe early second round, and just all we need is a healthy season from Nico Collins, and I think he's got like a 110, 1500, 12 season percolating in him.
Well, again, we're going to talk about those Texans on this offseason question show. Before we get to that, just want to give a quick programming note. This offseason, we are going to be hitting your feed every Tuesday and Thursday through mid-March. We're going to be recording at the Scouting Combine, as Scott mentioned, in 2 weeks. We have 2 great shows that we're planning for that week in particular, so stay tuned for that. And then starting mid-March, we're going to be in your feed 3 days a week as we are bringing back Mock Draft Monday, like we did last offseason, to get you ready for everything you need to know for this draft season. So let's waste no more time. Let's get into it. We are 70 days away from the NFL draft. Let's start priming the people for these offseason questions here. And we're going to go in the draft order for these AFC teams. So we'll be going from worst to best. So we start with the Tennessee Titans, Scott, who are the owners of the number 1 overall pick. The offseason question we have for them is basically, are they going to go with the rookie quarterback, or are they going to go veteran stopgap? And I think this is an important question because, number one, it's interesting to consider, Scott, like, what is the timeline for this coaching staff as they now bring in a new general manager coming off a disastrous year? I think there was some conversation, could Brian Callahan have been one and done? And even more importantly, from a fantasy perspective, Scott, we do have to care who's playing quarterback for this team, because there are players worth investing in this on this offense. Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears played well at times. Chigo Okonkwo kind of finished really strong. So there are some skill position players on this roster that people might want to draft in fantasy, and yet we do not have any idea what the quarterback plan is here.
Yeah, they just need so much. 31st in DVOA, as you mentioned, the holders of the one pick. They were 2-15 against the spread last year, so they weren't just losing games, but they were losing games by more points than we expected. You might like the skill talent here a little bit more than I do, and I'm a long carrying fan of Chico Okonkwo. Obviously, Tony Pollard had a nice bounce back season. He was healthy. He was not healthy in his last season in Dallas. Sorry, producer Colin. Because the quarterbacks at the top of the draft, there's nice things you can say about Cam Ward. There's nice things you can say about Shedeur Sanders. And maybe the Titans will get somebody who wants to pay up to move up in the draft to get one of those guys. Maybe they fall in love with one of those guys themselves. But when you need as many pieces as Tennessee needs, and there isn't that dunk of a quarterback, I would not take a quarterback. My goal is to start building your house foundationally and not try to do a quick fix of, if we land on the right quarterback, we can just turn things around and be like a 9-8 team next year and like a quasi contender, follow the script of maybe what the Texans were when they drafted Stroud a couple of years ago. Obviously they got Will Anderson in that draft. They did some other things well. You mentioned Nico Collins, who we'll be talking about this whole show, but I think Tennessee needs too much and the quarterbacks are not sure enough that I would just find somebody to hold the door open. You're probably going to have a top 10 pick next year and hope that I think it's going to be a much better quarterback class in 2026. Nate Tice has them taking Hunter at number 1 if they hold the pick, which I think would be perfectly reasonable. I would not draft a quarterback if I'm the Titans. Not in the first round. If you see somebody interesting later, that's perfectly reasonable, but I would not be in the quarterback business at the top of the draft for them.
My guess is that is the way that this plays out. I don't think they will talk themselves into a Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders at number 1. And I think they will go kind of veteran stopgap. But I guess the question there, Scott, is just what level of veteran stopgap are we talking about? Is it somebody that could give way to a day 2 rookie at some point? And then if that day 2 rookie doesn't play well, it's like, okay, who cares? We're drafting one in the first round next year, and this guy is just kind of like our long-term backup. Think of like the Texans with Davis Mills. He was a 3rd rounder, and they puddled around with him for a couple of years, but now he's just their backup quarterback, so it's fine. I think the Titans could do something similar there, but just again, I'm with you. I'm not like that jazzed about these skill position players, but there are some names that could be interesting if that veteran stopgap guy is a little bit higher on the totem pole than maybe just, I don't know, like a Mason Rudolph type or something like that.
I could see Russell Wilson being on the Titans next year, something like that. Is that a move forward? I don't know. What's going to happen with Daniel Jones? They're going to sign somebody in that realm, I think, or add somebody in that realm, and with the understanding that there's no guarantee they'll be starting come December.
All right, let's move to the next team here, which is the Cleveland Browns. They are also an owner of a top 3 pick. My question here is, I could have just gone straight up like quarterback plan, but kind of looping that into like a larger point for me was, what's our level of faith in Kevin Stefanski at this point, Scott? Because I think this offense, it's kind of going a little bit under discussed that, I'm not saying this is like a radical transformation here, but it was very clear last year, and I also think this was very clearly ownership driven, that they tried to do even more than ever to make this Deshaun Watson thing work. They bring in Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator, who comes from more of like a spread background with Josh Allen, which the Bills themselves have moved away from. Ken Dorsey now on the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff as a passing game assistant or something like that, which I think is a little interesting. But again, specifically with the Browns, Dorsey calls plays at one point. Stefanski fires him at the end of the year, and now it's kind of clear they're maybe going back to that Stefanski vision. I don't even think Watson's a part of their plans. I think he will probably never take another snap for the team again. But Nick Chubb's a free agent. Outside of Jerry Jeudy, they have Cedric Tillman, who flashed last year. I'm interested in Tillman. Njoku's still a guy we're drafting. So the overall vision of this offense is something that's still on my radar here.
And I'm still willing to give Stefanski the benefit of the doubt. I mean, the lesson in rounders is that you throw your cards in the moment they can't win. You fold the hand. And because Cleveland had invested so much in Watson, they felt like they couldn't do that. We had to live with like a half a season of Watson. And then we saw the full Jameis Winston experience. The highs were highs, the lows were low. That game against Denver will always have, where he was, throwing either a long touchdown to one of his teammates or a long pick six to one of the Broncos. I mean, it's just for fantasy purposes, that might have been the game of the year, and it was on a Monday night to boot. So your fantasy matchup was ping ponging back and forth. But Stefanski, I mean, he went to the playoffs, 2 years ago, mostly on the shoulders of Joe Flacco. He had some moments with Baker Mayfield. They obviously overreacted to the 1 year Mayfield was hurt with them and made a series of bad decisions. You can rebound from that. I still think Stefanski is somebody we can trust. Now, the problem is who's their quarterback, because the Watson thing's probably over. That's good. They saw Winston's flaws. They need to shoot higher than that. There's DTR, Bailey Zappi, those guys are going to be career backups at best. So they need to figure out. Now, good news is they also need to figure out what they're going to do with Myles Garrett, who doesn't want to be here. I can understand why. So can they find a trade that makes sense, or can they convince him that the program can be fixed? And again, the Cleveland, they illustrate so much what we see in the NFL. They were in the playoffs 13 months ago. We see that year in and year out that teams have mild 4, 5, 6 win or loss changes to their record. So maybe they can piece something together. I don't know what veteran quarterback they're going to settle on. I'm just glad, Matt, you said you don't think Watson will take another snap with them. It's possible his career is over, and I just don't want to live through any more of that. And I think Stefanski was just kind of forced to say the right things at the press conference and not, say what he probably wanted to say. The decisions were made over his head. He had to live with the hand he was dealt when he really would like to just throw those cards in the muck. And I'm just glad at least they get a fresh start, just not having that albatross over them. I realize they've restructured some of the deal. It's still going to hamper them financially. Ironically, even though we're a fantasy show, their biggest first thing I think they need to do, and I know quarterback always hovers over an organization, but they need to figure out how to get their best player happy, because Myles Garrett is, he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. He's one of the 3 or 4 most destructive defensive players in the league, and they really need to see if they can keep him.
That's going to be tough. I think that could get ugly before it gets resolved, and because I think they have little incentive to trade him. I think it actually hurts them financially to trade him, which is just it's so tough. Just the things that, like, the ramifications, the ripple effect of the Watson deal. Like, not only have you made yourself so irrelevant and so bad because of this trade that your best player is pissed off at you, you also have hurt yourself financially so bad that you can't even trade your best player when he is pissed off at you. So that's a tough scene. But I do think that I think that's a complicated question. I also think quarterback is complicated too. So we'll see how the Browns approach this. But I'm with you, Scott, that my level of faith in Stefanski is still relatively high, and I'm curious to see what he's able to put together.
Also, next year, remember, sees age 29 season for Nick Chubb. First year off a major injury. I think it was realistic to not expect much, and he didn't do much. Is there another act for Nick Chubb? It's one of my all-time favorite players. I think most people in the fantasy community love that guy because of the talent, because he's a good dude. And is Nick Chubb done? Can Nick Chubb still be even a running back too? That's something I need to resolve, because I don't really know how I feel about that.
Got to figure out if they're going to bring him back. He is again, he's going to be a free agent. I hope he's back with the Browns. And again, if they're going back to more of a Stefanski-led vision, that's good for Nick Chubb. More under center stuff, less spread. It was always, again, Chubb, outside of Garrett, was probably their second best player for a longest time. And Watson and him were kind of like oil and water stylistically. So again, just another reason that was a terrible idea. Let's go to your New England Patriots here with the next one, Scott, which this one's just plain and simple. How will this team surround Drake May with a support system? Because we know they are going to. We also know they have a lot of resources to do it. They have an absurd nearly $120 million in cap space at the moment. They brought back Josh McDaniels to be the offensive coordinator. I will note that I don't want to dive too deep into play caller stuff, because next week Nate Tice is going to join the show, and we're going to do like a full deep dive into every coaching hire, every coordinator hire, stuff like that. So that's going to be really fun. But I do overall think the McDaniel hire is pretty good. And obviously this is a team that has a lot of resources to surround Drake May. So in your mind, Scott, pass catcher, skill position player, offensive line, is it all just kind of on the table here?
Yeah, they've done so many things I like. I think one of the cheat codes when it comes to assembling a staff in the NFL is anytime you can take former head coaches and get them back to be coordinators or even position coaches, you've done a great job. And this staff has Josh McDaniels, Doug Marrone, who's going to handle the offensive line. By the way, Dante Scarnecchia is welcome to stop by anytime he wants. I know he says he's happily retired, but anytime Scarnecchia wants to take in a practice, I'd welcome that too. And Ben McAdoo, who I know nobody liked as a head coach, but he was a head coach with the Giants for a while. He is a spot on this staff too. That is a great. We just saw
on the defensive side, I think, right?
Right.
Which which is interesting.
Yes, it is a defensive post, and it's kind of further down the masthead. But we saw it with the Eagles, right? Vic Fangio, nobody liked him as a head coach. He was pretty darn brilliant as a coordinator as the Eagles dominated. No blitzes, and they got Patrick Mahomes' grill for 4.5 hours on Sunday. So I love what they've done with the coaching staff. You mentioned all the cap room. Hey, Bob Kraft, how about improving your facilities? You always get killed on those resumes because you don't have a great weight room, you don't have great family support or whatever it is. I can't speak to that stuff personally. I'm not there. I just know the players don't like it. I'd like to see Kraft spend some money on his team. But yeah, excited about the cap space. Obviously, Drake May did in a really bad situation. Their offensive line was horrible. They had a couple of turnstiles playing at the tackle spot. So that's the first position I'd go to. I know it's just so frustrating. They seem to miss on receivers in good draft classes, right? N'Keal Harry in 2019. I've talked about that till I blew in the face. I'm just worried that last year the receivers they took in a pretty good receiver group were maybe the wrong people. But the first thing you got to do is you got to take a bookend tackle so that Drake May can keep his nerve and keep his confidence. He did not have it beaten out of him. I realized he didn't play for about a month, but even though he was constantly under duress, it didn't hurt May's development. And they need to continue with that by actually giving him a chance. I even getting this offensive line to be adequate would be something I would take. I think their first choice has to be an offensive lineman.
I really agree with that. I think that's a good way of saying it. And shoot, the thing is they do have needs on defense. That's another part of this too. I don't think this can just be like an offensive centric offseason, but I do think you've got to come out of this with like a starting level receiver. At least you got to at least come away with one. I'm interested to see what this coaching staff can, I don't want to bag on Gerard Mayo too hard, but it was just clear that was like he was just not prepared for that job, and I think that was understandable. He'd only been coaching since 2019. This is a professional coaching staff, and I think the front office's comments about some of the receivers that they took last year, they thought there was going to be more impact from those guys, and it kind of seemed, and that some of that front office is still around. I'd imagine that they are hoping that a professional coaching staff can get something out of those young guys there that maybe haven't really come on yet. That's maybe just hopium. We'll see about that, but definitely offensive line, I think, is a big starting point.
I also want to say that producer Colin is talking about T. Higgins, who we'll get to him later. What does Cincinnati do? Can they make that work? If the Patriots make a splash in free agency with a receiver or in a trade with a signing, I really hope it's somebody who's like where T. Higgins is in his career, and I hope it's not. I would take Cooper Kupp if they got a really friendly deal on it. I don't know that they would. I don't want Stephon Diggs here. I really don't. Kupp is, certainly a back nine, closing in on 17 or 18 type of player. If they do make a splash in free agency, give me somebody in the middle of their career, somebody who maybe hasn't had their best season. I don't want somebody where we know, oh yeah, we've seen the best of Stephon Diggs. We've seen the best of Cooper Kupp. I hope they don't go after the 30-something receivers. I hope they're looking at players who are, 3-4 years younger at minimum.
Well, again, we will get to T. Higgins, but beyond T. Higgins, buddy, I got bad news for you, big dog. Like the open market is full of guys that we've probably seen the best of. DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper. I think Devontae Adams is going to get free at some point. Hollywood Brown, Keenan Allen.
Right. And the Jets are never going to trade them Garrett Wilson. Even if the Jets can't figure out, then, man, that's something we could talk about for a couple hours too, and we'll probably mention them in the Jets segment. But what I would actually like to see them do is be proactive in the draft at receiver. Just don't take one in the first round. I mean, we've seen in the last 5, 6, 7 years how many great receivers, impact receivers, have come out of round 2 and round 3. That would be a great, and even if they don't want to, I know there's a lot of players who make sense for them at that 4 pick, but if they can trade down and get some extra capital and then have another, man, last year it was right there. Ladd McConkey was there for the taking, and they traded down, and that, man, I think that's going to haunt them for a while, because McConkey sure looks like a hit. I would love him on this team with Drake May for the next 5, 6 years, but I think a second or third round receiver is probably going to happen for them.
They have 2 picks in the 3rd round because they have a 3rd rounder from the Matthew Judon trade. So I agree with you. Throw some darts at that position. Let's move to the Jacksonville Jaguars here. We know Brian Thomas Jr. rules. Great player. But my question here is, how many of the previous Jaguars era playmakers stick around this roster? A couple of things here to note. Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram are the two highest cap charges on the books for Jacksonville in 2025, and they have no guaranteed money left on their deals. And also it's worth noting, does Liam Cohen, the new head coach, he's going to call plays, does he have any attachment and enthusiasm to the backfield duo here of Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby? I mean, again, Kirk and Ingram have been staples of the Jacksonville offense the last few years. I think there's a chance one or maybe both of those guys are not on the roster next year.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, Kirk, age 29 season coming. Ingram is 31, which is really old for a tight end. So I don't think either one is. I think there's a good chance that both of them are gone. I'm just thrilled. Brian Thomas, everything around him was bad last year, and he was great anyway. And I think he's going to be a first-round pick when drafts start. Maybe right now he might be an early second-round pick in some leagues, but he's going to be a first-round pick by top 12 pick by the teeth of draft season. And I'm just what Cohen did. I was worried, Matt, that Dave Canales leaving Tampa Bay. We just had this Baker Mayfield comeback. What's going on? I think Cohen was better, and I'm thrilled to see can he get Trevor Lawrence, back to even a league average quarterback. So many things. Maybe just the game had just passed Peterson by. Maybe he just kind of hit the Frank Reich part of his career where it's like, okay, well, you did a lot of things we respect, but you're not current with concepts, and maybe it's just no longer time for you to helm an offense. And so they get an up-and-comer in Cohen. And I think you make a great point that I think a lot of people might miss. Even though their running backs are young, it's not like Kirk and Ingram. They're going to age out of their positions soon enough. But Liam Cohen didn't draft those guys. Liam Cohen did not sign up for those guys, and they're still incomplete players. We know Bigsby didn't catch a lot of passes last year. It was a really poor season for Etienne. Last year, Tampa Bay, even though they didn't have an overwhelming need at running back, they found Bucky Irving in the draft. He was terrific. They even got some moments from Tucker as their third running back. So I would not be surprised at all if they said, okay, they talk up their running backs in public because they always do things like that, and then they take somebody in the second or third round. But we need more fantasy offenses that we can feel good about. We had one player we could feel good about in the Jaguars last year. There's going to be multiple players we can feel good about this year because I just believe I am ready to follow Liam Cohen wherever he goes.
I agree. Obviously, really high on Liam Cohen. Talked about a lot all year long. They have 2 picks in the third round and 2 picks in the fourth round. So either of those could be a back. I mean, no question about it. But if I had to guess right now, I think they just try to make it work with those two guys, and they really hammer offensive line because that. And Cohen even said that he's spoken. This might mean nothing, but he obviously spoke highly of the two backs, but really hammered the point that they need to fix the offensive line, which was really the key in the Buccaneers run game getting revived last season from what it was last year, obviously with the addition of Bucky Irving as well. So I could honestly see that going either way. And in terms of pass catcher, you probably don't want to hamper the pass catching spot, but I think Ingram is probably more likely than Kirk to be gone if I had to guess, and I could be totally wrong about that, but that's just like a pure guess on that one. Let's move to the next team here, Las Vegas Raiders. Simple question. Do we see a big swing at quarterback or a punt year at quarterback here for the Las Vegas Raiders, Scott? Because I think you can squint at the Raiders offense and actually see a unit that if you dropped a high caliber quarterback, and again, high caliber quarterback, where you find one of those, but if you could find one, I think this actually is an offense that's relatively well set up to go. I think they have continuity and pretty decent play on the offensive line. They have Brock Bowers, they have Jacoby Myers. That's a starting point right there. They do need some more supplemental pass catchers, and they certainly need a running back. But I could see them, and obviously we know Pete Carroll is he wants to compete. He said that in his press conference. That is the ethos of Pete Carroll. I have a tough time imagining they're just going to punt at quarterback. But at the same time, Scott, we saw them punt at quarterback and have some success in his early days with the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean, Pete Carroll at his age in his 70s, he's not here for a multi-year rebuild. He wants to be, and you said the right word too. Pete Carroll is competition. That he always said that in Seattle, that everybody's out. Every week you're trying to play your best guys. There's only a couple of positions where somebody's going to be unchallenged. You can't really have a quarterback position work that way. But I'm just excited. When they first hired Carroll, I thought, oh, how can this possibly work? But now I'm like, you know what? Why not? Now look at this division now. Every coach is interesting, right? I mean, Andy Reid somehow has not been coach of the year at all when he's been with the Chiefs. He won it once with Philadelphia. Peyton just made the playoffs. Harbaugh brought the Chargers back to relevance. They made the playoffs. And Pete Carroll is not going to, he's not here to go 6-11. Now they need to figure out the quarterback room. Obviously Bowers just had the best tight end season. All the stuff that Sam Laporta did, Brock Bowers laughed at and said, okay, you didn't see my best game at Georgia. We didn't need to throw the ball that much, but watch me with mediocre quarterbacks have an absolute just ridiculous season. I think they're going to try to do something impactful at quarterback, whether it means moving up to get somebody like Sanders, which could make sense. I could see that. I can see them maybe trading for a guy like Stafford. It sounds a little bit crazy, but Pete Carroll is not here to build a 2028 winning team. He wants to make this team competitive right away, and that's going to start with them doing something impactful. Daniel Jones. Yeah, I would not hate Daniel Jones in this offense.
I would hate Daniel Jones in this offense, but that's just me. I think they could actually stick at 6 and maybe see Sanders fall to them. I think this is very much a draft where I think the Giants at 3 are going to feel compelled to come away from this draft with a quarterback. I think they have to. There's also the Matthew Stafford thing, I think, looming over teams like the Giants and teams like the Raiders. Now, if I'm Matthew Stafford, I'm not necessarily trying to sign up for one of those, but if it's done with him in Los Angeles, I think a move to play under Pete Carroll, Tom Brady's in the building, like this is Chip Kelly's offense. I think it's very interesting. And again, you've got some pass catchers here. That could maybe be a big swing. They could also be a Darnold team.
Yeah,
I really am kind of.
Producer Colin was talking about Darnold. I didn't think about that initially, but I think this would actually be a great place for Darnold to go.
Yeah, I think this would be a solid Darnold spot. And again, it would get them to be competitive. Would they win the AFC West? Would they go to the playoffs? Well, they definitely ain't going to win the damn AFC West, but could they go to the playoffs? Probably not, but still, I think it makes them at least a little more interesting.
They could be a really frisky, kind of the team they were 2 years ago. They could be a really frisky, 7-10 team. And remember, they had the Chiefs. A lot of teams are saying this. They had the Chiefs beat, and then they basically botched the end game, right? I mean, the defense, if you can give me a healthy Max Crosby season, I don't hate the defense. Yeah, Sam, I wish I had thought of it originally. I think Sam Darnold to Vegas actually makes a lot of sense, assuming Sanders doesn't somehow fall in their lap.
We're going to say Sam Darnold's name a mysterious amount of times on this podcast. And let's talk about Sam Darnold's original NFL team here with our next operation up, which is the New York Jets. My question here is this a sneaky big offseason for 2 top 12 to 14 consensus picks in fantasy last year? And what I mean by that is Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, obviously the 2 guys I'm talking about here. Aaron Glenn brings in Tanner Engstrand as the offensive coordinator. We don't know too much about him, but he was the pass game coordinator for the Detroit Lions. I'm interested in Engstrand as a play caller here. I'm interested to see what he brings to the Jets. I love the Aaron Glenn hire. I love what he's bringing to the building. But again, I think it's blank slate here for a lot of these guys. Garrett Wilson, there's been some trade whispers there. If I'm Aaron Glenn, the first thing I'm doing they already did the first thing, which was tell Aaron Rodgers, thank you for your service. Not really, but we'll be going forward without you. Second thing would be, I'm going to get Garrett Wilson on board with what we're doing here and probably pay him a bunch of money so that he really wants to be here. But I also think in the backfield, it's interesting too. Does this new staff have any level of attachment or interest in the pair of rookies who kind of flashed at times last year? Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, is Breece Hall end up being a great kind of rebound candidate in fantasy, or do we see more of a committee here because this staff's not all that jazzed about Hall? I think there's a lot on the table here for the Jets. They have 2 established players and kind of not a lot else at the skill position spots, and obviously quarterback is up for grabs. But man, I don't know. Again, these 2 guys were, and it probably wasn't a good idea, were top 12, 14 picks in fantasy last year, and I really don't know what to expect out of them this coming season.
Yeah, I'm really excited what the Jets have done. Like Glenn was a great hire. And they very quickly just got this Rodgers thing over with, right? I mean, it just, the worst thing would have been to bring him back. The second worst thing would have been just to have it fester and linger and the uncertainty. And it's like, no. This is a guy, he's in his 40s. He doesn't seem like has any upside left. I mean, they wanted him. I guess they talked about him not wanting to do some of these outside projects. They didn't feel like he was fully committed to the task at hand. He just overwhelms your program, which is fine when he's great. Or when he's good. He wasn't any of those things last year. So just moving on from Rodgers, even if they have to have a gap year quarterback, I can handle that. So now what you do, Aaron Glenn is a persuasive guy. He understands not just tactical stuff, but he has a great understanding of player human nature. He had unbelievable relationships with the defenders on that Lions team that he coached. And unfortunately, just the injuries, kind of capsized their season. Maybe they wouldn't have beaten Philadelphia anyway, but they got to do a sell job on Garrett Wilson. Blame everything on Rodgers, right? He's gone. Okay, he was the problem. Your problem is gone. You're one of the best receivers. I just look at Garrett Wilson and I see Terry McLaurin. I see a receiver who's trying to be great and being held back by everything around him. And finally, Terry McLaurin had his payoff season. What a wonderful year he had with Jaden Daniels in play. There's not going to be a Jaden Daniels for the Jets next year, but Garrett Wilson is going to be a great player. It's just a matter of the pieces fit. I don't know what to do with Breece Hall. I had him top 5 like everybody else did last year. And just the fact that he looks so ordinary in so many different games, and I was just begging for other people to play. I think it's an open question how good Breece Hall really is.
Yeah, I think that is an open question. It's not an open question for Garrett Wilson. I think, there's some things he needs to tighten up in his game to really be, like an elite number 1 receiver, but he is absolutely a number 1 to me and a really good player. And it does sound like his problems were with Rodgers last year. By the end, that relationship really deteriorated to the point that, I think he was the whole point of like him pushing trade rumors out there, and it did kind of sound like it was from his camp, were the frustrations of playing with Rodgers and then, him and Adams, the whole thing. So I'm interested to see how that relationship develops with this new staff in New York.
Adams 33 next year, by the way. That makes me extremely nervous.
And he'll be playing elsewhere. There's no way he's back with this team. They'll get out of his contract. Him and Rodgers will both be on the open market. And I can definitely find more teams that could use a 33-year-old Devontae Adams more than a team could use Aaron Rodgers. But I think somebody, if Rodgers doesn't retire, will ultimately bite on him as their starting quarterback. Will be interesting to hear if you have a candidate at some point in our list here. Let's go to the next team in the AFC East too. Miami Dolphins. My question here, Scott, is does this team just basically run back the same crew and hope for different results? They have the 5th lowest cap space in the NFL right now. Sounds like Tyreek Hill was doing the rounds at Radio Row and saying, hey, I'm committed to the Dolphins. I basically walk back everything I said at the end of the regular season. We'll see if that's true. Jalen Waddle's locked up long-term. Devon Achane, is he back as just the full-cut featured running back after he was great in fantasy, but the rushing efficiency really fell off the landscape there. And Jonnu Smith, I think, is going to be back next year. That was obviously a successful signing for them. So, yeah, I mean, I just think there's a lot of open – is it just the same crew, hope for different results? And are those results going to be any different next season?
I still can't get over that stat that after week 1, Tyreek Hill's longest reception was 30 yards. I don't know how that's possible. And obviously, Tua had that early concussion, and then when he came back, they just didn't want to do deep drops. They were so concerned about keeping him healthy and getting him just not hit if they could avoid it. And you can't really – I think there's just some gloves that have to come off. There's some training wheels that have to come off, and you have to it's not fun to say it because nobody wants to see Tua Tagovailoa get concussed again, but I think they have to open up the playbook in a way that wasn't open the last maybe 2 months of the season. And we're going to find out, Mike McDaniel, we talked about Stefanski earlier. I mean, one moment you're the talk of the town, you're the coach of the year, you're one of 4 or 5 most respected offensive minds in football, and then a season goes by and now you're just another guy who doesn't know what he's doing or needs to figure out answers or how good really is Mike McDaniel. We're going to find out. And it feels like we say this every year with Tua, but this year I'm putting it on McDaniel. This is a fork in the road. This is going to be okay, he's our guy, and everything we felt about him, all that optimism, all the flowers we threw at his feet were justified, or maybe Miami's in the search for a new coach at this time next season. A gigantic fork in the road year. I just still don't know. I wish Tua, his arm strength was a little bit better, or he was a little bit more mobile, a little taller. I mean, I think he does a really good job with the physical ability he has. And I think he's a likable guy. I think he's a hard worker. I want Tua to succeed. I just wish he had like that A minus, B plus, skill set. I think he's an ordinary, physically gifted quarterback who's doing the best that he can, and maybe just accept that there's a capped ceiling here.
Yeah, obviously a starting quarterback, but you're right. I think the prevailing thought about Tua was, when is Mike McDaniel going to try to get his Matthew Stafford, making the obvious comparison to Sean McVay, Jared Goff. And I think now I'm with you that my faith is really shaken in Mike McDaniel as a head coach. Not really people just do not understand that, like, being a play caller or like being an offensive coordinator and being a play calling head coach, 2 very, very different jobs. I think McDaniel would be a great OC. Look, I think you could be a Cliff Kingsbury, right? Where Kingsbury, like as a play calling head coach, not good. Kingsbury as an offensive coordinator last year, really, really good. I think McDaniel could maybe be suited to that. And I say this, Scott, on the back of making a point on the Super Bowl podcast that if I'm at all invested in the Miami Dolphins, it really bothers me that the players in that building could not have pushed Vic Fangio out faster. And then he's a huge reason why the Eagles just lifted a damn Lombardi trophy. So that would really bother me as to what the building feels like right now. So I don't know if we're going to get like a real needle moving fantasy player added to this offense in the offseason. And I can't decide if that is a good thing or not. One addition I'm very confident will be made is for our next team here, Indianapolis Colts. My question here is, what level of competition do they bring in for Anthony Richardson? And I say, like, what level of competition, Scott? Because it's pretty clear, listening to Chris Ballard right now, they're going to add some level of competition. It's just like, at what level is that player? Is it a Justin Fields? Is it like a day 3 rookie they're going to sell you as competition? I'm curious as to what that looks like, because there's no chance this team can just walk into 2025 with Richardson as the unquestioned starter, and it sounds like they know that too.
You know, I like our colleague Frank Schwab, I try to rewatch all the games in the offseason, and I don't know if I have the stomach to rewatch all the Colts games because Richardson, who already was a work in progress, just got worse. And I realized his confidence was shot, and I realized there were injuries, there was a benching. It's not like Joe Flacco did anything that great when Richardson wasn't playing. But I mean, the completion percentage cannot live in today's NFL, and it's a shame because the skill talent's good. I don't know if there's some players on this offense. Maybe I'm just always overrating Michael Pittman a little bit, but he's a good player. Jonathan Taylor had a really nice season. I like their secondary receivers. This offense is ready to cook, but Richardson is not. It's almost like you synchronize your watches, and his watch is on a different time. You know, it's like 3.5 hours off. You know, passes don't come out on schedule. His decision making is a problem. You're never surprised when he makes the great long throw, but those drive sustaining, they can't matriculate the ball down the field. They can't keep their offense off the field. They have too many games where even though they hit a couple of big plays, they only had like 13 first downs, and you can't play in the NFL that way. You need to be better on third down. You need to be able to convert. You know, sometimes the best throw you can make is the 7-yard throw that's open because you recognized it and you made an accurate pass. What I would do if I ran the Colts is I wouldn't bring in anybody who's quote unquote challenging Richardson, because I think you just give him another year of it's your gig. We believe in you, whether or not you even think that way. You have to put all your confidence eggs in that basket. And then after this year, if it's gone kablooey again, then you reevaluate and you have to try to do what every bad team does, which is try to find the right quarterback. But I would not want Richardson to feel like whoever they brought in was a threat to his job. I think you just need to live with him for a year and the accidents and see if you can progress with him, see if you can actually have him move in the right direction, because he got worse last year, which I did not think was possible. I realized he only played, 4 or 5 games his rookie year, and we always come back to he didn't even play that much at Florida. We're talking about a guy who has such a short body of work. I would bring in somebody who's just a caddy. I would, and if you get somebody who was a veteran quarterback, like I think of who Josh McCown was at the end of his career, somebody who could play a little bit, but he's almost like an assistant coach. He's another voice in the headset. He's another somebody that bounce ideas off in the quarterback room. That's the type of guy I'd like to see them add, who he adds value as a quasi-coach, but he's not a threat to Richardson. I'm just afraid that Anthony Richardson might be a lost cause. That said, they need to invest 2025 to determine that for sure.
The problem there, and why I don't think that that's the path that they're going to take, besides the fact that, again, I think they keep telling us like competition is going to be added here, is that if you're right and Richardson is a lost cause, they're going to know it like 5 weeks into the season, and all of these guys' jobs is on the line. Like, I think Chris Ballard is lucky to be back.
That's right.
I think Shane Steichen,
that's right.
Definitely the shine is off on him. The fan base is basically ready to revolt on this team. And those guys are not going to want to say like 5 games into the season, well, it's over. because they'll all be cleaned out of the building, Richardson included, if this doesn't go well. And I think they'll almost feel they need to have an alternative to go to that is more than just a keep the ship afloat for the rest of the year.
That is such a great point, that even though organizations can think long-term, coaching staffs and executives have to think short-term. And, these guys it might be a playoff or bust season for Ballard and Steichen this year. And it's just interesting how reputations change. I mean, think of how we felt about Shane Steichen a couple of years ago, and think of how we feel about Shane Steichen now. We'll get to Houston in a little bit. Bobby Slowick's stock totally collapsed in a year. It's just the NFL, your opinions are always, we don't know what Mike McDaniel is right now. Just your opinions are always shifting in this crazy league.
Yeah, and I want to draft some of these receivers in fantasy next year, but the quarterback position is so in flux. So I do think that makes it really difficult for me, and I think anybody else that wants to click a Colts wide receiver next season, as much as I really love the talent. And Jonathan Taylor coming off a great year other than a couple of mistakes around the goal line. All right, let's take our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk through some actually good teams here and what they're going to do in the 2025 offseason right after this. All right, we're back. Scott, let's go through some more teams here, starting with the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of offseason questions for Cincinnati, but I think it has to start with, will T. Higgins remain with this team? And Scott, I've said this like every day. I feel like I have a different thought on whether Higgins is back with the Bengals or whether he is on another team. Because if he tests the open market, I mean, we talked about the Patriots earlier, some team like that is going to make him a top 5 paid player at the position, no question. And nobody hates money. And I know he's got a different agent right now, but the next agent who tells their client, let's take the lower money deal, they'll be the first. Okay, so let's just get that out of the way. However, it's obvious Higgins wants to remain with Joe Burrow and the boys. It's obvious Joe Burrow. Dude, Joe Burrow's out there on podcasts talking about like cap restructures and signing bonuses and all that stuff. So he knows that this can be done if the Bengals want to be creative. And the reason right now, Scott, I think he's back with this team is if you just look at the projected tag number for Higgins, since it's the second time that he would be tagged in as many seasons, it would be just north of $26 million. A few other wide receivers in that APY. Number one is Nico Collins at 24.3, which is just a dramatic steal for the Houston Texans. Devontae Smith at 25 million. Cooper Kupp 26.7 million, who obviously he's not going to play on that number next season. But like DJ Moore at 27.5 million. For the Bengals, why would you not just tag Higgins again and give yourself some more time to hopefully come to a long-term agreement? Because that's what I would do. So right now, as we sit here, my guess is he is on this team. But Scott, that is where everything starts in terms of the Bengals offseason. For sure. And then, of course, long-term, they need to figure out the Chase situation too. I mean, Chase had a monster season. Remember, he was unhappy before the season. Then he bet on himself, and man, did that come in totally, cherry. I love the way Joe Burrow's handling this. I realize he's not the first quarterback to be open to restructuring and to pitch for his guys, but he's just doing what a leader should do, and he's trying to bring this band back together. And the Bengals, every year there's a couple of teams where it's like, oh man, they didn't make the playoffs, but I wish they did. They could have beaten anybody. The Bengals were that team. And I want this run back because I think Joe Burrow has an MVP season in him. He may have had an MVP season this year that was only held back because the team wasn't successful, because the numbers were certainly there for Burrow. So I'm hoping Higgins stays, but it comes down to what kind of person is T. Higgins? What is important to him? If he's content being a hell of a football player, but always the 1A or the 1B to Jamar Chase, there's nothing wrong with that, but he might want to have a team to himself. He might want to have a team where he's the guy prioritized off the bus, and he's the guy who's featured on the cover of the media guide and stuff like that. Maybe I don't know how happy he is in the Cincinnati area, if he has roots there, if he's got his dream home there, or if he's open to going somewhere else. A lot of times players want to live in warmer climates. Sometimes it's the tax situations of different states. Selfishly, I want everything coming back because this team there's a 12-5, 530 point season in the Bengals waiting to happen. And I think if they bring Higgins back, that's a huge part of that. So I think it's 60-40 that he's on the Bengals next year, but obviously there's a lot that could go wrong with that. Let's just play hypothetical here. If you say you had T. Higgins in Dynasty, right? Are you rooting for him to return to this situation? Like, take what you feel or whatever out of it, just from like a pure production standpoint. Are you rooting for him to return to this situation where he's the second fiddle, but I mean, it's a great situation, and just look at the numbers last year, the per game numbers, he was one of the best wide receivers in fantasy last year? Or are you rooting for kind of like that upside of the unknown of he goes to the open market and he signs with a team like the Patriots with Drake May or something like that, where he could walk into just kind of like a 30% target share? What are you personally rooting for there if you had T. Higgins in Dynasty?
I want him to stay, but obviously as a Patriots fan, I'd welcome him. The Chargers would be a good fit. Also, producer Colin mentions, wouldn't it be nice if the Bengals get off to a good start for once? I mean, they hate September worse than your fifth grader, I mean, they don't like those early games. I don't know if they need to change how they approach the preseason. Maybe they need to take a page from the Steeler book and do more hitting and be more ready for September. Of course, Pittsburgh finishes so poorly that they have to reevaluate their process as well. But T. Higgins, one thing that happens, my colleague on the Breakfast Table podcast, Michael Salfino, talks about this. A lot of times when receivers change teams and their disappointments, it's because they've been asked to elevate from a 3 to a 2, from a 2 to a 1. And Higgins isn't a 1 right now. He would be on any other team he would sign with or get traded to. So is that something he can handle? I think it is, but it's at least a question we have to ask ourselves.
Right. It's a great point. It's an outstanding question for me as well. And honestly, for that reason, I do think when I view T. Higgins in isolation, like forget production and stuff like that, I think he's more of a high end 2 than he is a true number 1. And so for that reason, if I'm rooting from like a fantasy perspective, I want him back in Cincinnati too, than in some other spot. All right.
It's also a great setup for Chase too. I mean, when you can have somebody who draws attention but doesn't overwhelm you from a target standpoint. And and they have a narrow tree anyway, right? I mean, Chase Brown obviously was great last year. They had moments where Mike Gesicki was productive, but never really a fantasy reliable guy. I mean, that's the other thing. This was the ultimate carnival. They were allowing points. Yeah. They have a star MVP quality quarterback, and they have an extremely narrow tree that distributed the ball to 3 guys who were all superstars. I mean, Chase Brown played one anyway. I don't know what he'll be going forward, but you do not get any more in a time where teams are spreading the ball around, and it can be hard to figure out where the targets are going, where the distribution is going to be, who's going to score the touchdowns. The Bengals were a perfect fantasy team last year.
1,000%. And I mean, I do think they have to try to do something with that defense. They got to do what the Eagles do, which is, they retain all their guys on offense, but they actually hit on their damn defensive draft picks and like get some good value signings in free agency. That's what the Bengals don't do. But on your point about like this being good for Chase too, it is very, very underrated that Chase is a guy who can go out there and play every single snap at X receiver and absolutely dominate. But because T. Higgins is also a classic X receiver too, that allows Chase to move around the formation as well. So I think actually for the sake of both guys, you want T. Higgins back on this roster. Let's move to the next team here, Denver Broncos. Simple question. What playmakers are they adding and what positions are they going to play? That's maybe the more complicated part of this, Scott, because I think they basically have, it looks like they've got an answer at quarterback in Bo Nix, and Sean Payton, I think, is coming off a great season as the offensive designer, play caller, kind of the football czar there in Denver. I think they basically have a blank slate at running back and a blank slate at tight end. And the wide receiver, like Courtland Sutton, may need a new deal, honestly. And beyond that, they just kind of have some nice supporting pieces in the wide receiver room. So I could see an addition being made at any of those spots, especially because the defense is damn good and the offensive line is damn good. So this seems like an offseason, and they probably won't just do this, but I would think it would be perfectly justified if they just hammered the skill position players in the offseason.
Agree. You had some moments with Marvin Mims at the end of last year. We'll see if that carries over. I would love to see them get an explosive seam tight end. That would be so much fun. And curious to see how they handle Sutton. Remember, he's into an age 30 season. I love Courtland Sutton. He's been a great fantasy profit player the last 2 years, but just be careful with this deal, And
they've dangled him as a trade option too. I think it would be aggressive, put it that way, to trade Courtland Sutton right now after he's coming off such a good season with your young quarterback. And their games, Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton, just line up so well. But it's at least worth noting that they've dangled him as a trade option before. And if they're on your mindset, I guess it wouldn't be totally shocking to see him dealt this offseason.
Yeah, I think they're going to aggressively target tight end. I think they will do what most teams do at running back. We're in the middle of the draft. they'll find a player who was hurt in college or who was in some kind of a committee that maybe shielded what his natural upside was, and hope they get lucky with a player like that. You'll think of how the Giants, how they hit last year with that drafting principle. But please let's get Bo Nix somebody who is an easy target in the middle of the field. That's something I'm dying to see.
Something I'm dying to see. I would love it if Ashton Genty would fall to the 20th pick here. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's too many teams that would probably scoop him up ahead of there. But if he's really the special talent at running back, God, this is the ecosystem where he could really, I think, go to the moon. Let's move to an ecosystem that is not as exciting. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Simple question, Scott. What is next? What is the next quarterback plan? Because this is a moving target every offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers. In your mind, do you think they're the Darnold team? Do you think they run it back with Fields or Wilson? Because it does sound like it's an or for this team. I'd be a little surprised if both are back. Or is it maybe a rookie? I have no idea. So you tell me what the hell you think.
I think they're going to go after one of the veterans in trade, a Stafford, a Darnold. I think there's a lot of friction here. First of all, the Steelers are it's interesting. You look at their the great media that covers the Steelers and the passionate fan base that they have, and they can't seem to get on the same page of, is the glass half full or half empty here? Mike Tomlin doesn't have bad seasons, but they're never a threat to do anything in the playoffs. Is that okay? And a lot of people are saying, no, it's not. But you need to, obviously the situation needs to be upgraded. Also, they need to get the receiver that they complement Pickens with has to be like the most reliable. You never even think about him. Like, I would love it. It's obviously not going to happen, but I'd love to see like Glad McConkey on this team, right? I'd love to see somebody, even like a Christian Kirk for one season would make a lot of sense. It just, you need somebody who's the polar opposite of the wiring. Pickens, you love Pickens because he's great and he's innovative and he's like that freestyling lead guitarist. They need a bass player in this offense, and I don't feel like they had one last year, but it's going to be, I think they're going to totally start over a quarterback. And I could see themselves talking to Stafford for maybe a year or two. And I think Darnold, if that doesn't happen with the Raiders, I could see Sam Darnold in Pittsburgh making a lot of sense too.
They're kind of the one team, because I still think this Stafford stuff is kind of crazy on both sides of it. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know, but I don't know why Stafford would want to go finish his career with the damn Giants or, something like that. This is the one team I think if Stafford wants out of LA, which is basically he just wants more money than they're going to give him, which maybe that is understandable where he is at this point in his career. This is the team that I think would make some sense for him because they were a playoff team last year and they're in need of obviously a quarterback. And I think he would immediately make that offense a little bit more interesting if they can get the right run game. I think they need another back. I think not. If I'm them, I'd kind of let Najee Harris walk and maybe get a little more explosive there.
There's no juice with Harris at all. I know he's reliable and he plays hard and all that, but he just doesn't make second level runs enough.
I agree. Warren's a nice player, but he's probably not a feature back. So I think Harris is a big reason why that run game was kind of mid last year. And I'm at least my eyes are kind of squinted at the Pickens stuff right now. I wonder if he's a guy they might consider moving in the offseason just because he doesn't look like a guy they're gonna want to pay a second contract to just because Pickens is Pickens. Like that's what we're gonna have to say that all season. And they've obviously been smart about when to move on from wide receivers before look no further than the Deontay Johnson.
And plus their history of drafting receivers better than almost anybody else when you're talking about going outside the first round.
That last pick they made though, Roman Wilson didn't do a damn thing for them last year. So
they're going to be misses, but man, they made so many hits with that formula. That blueprint has worked for them.
All right, let's go to the next team here. Los Angeles Chargers. Question for them: what skill position players are they adding? Because they're going to add some. Scott, I don't know that I don't think they're a T. Higgins team if he gets to the open market. Just I'd be surprised by that. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I'm really only willing to write Lad McConkey in pen for right now. J.K. Dobbins is a free agent. Gus Edwards is a cut candidate at running back. I think Quentin Johnston can be on the field, but the playoffs and some big games show that you don't want to rely on him. So I like a lot of what I saw out of the Chargers offense last year. I think Greg Roman's a floor raiser, but a ceiling capper. Still, what would help that offense maybe get to another ceiling is another pass catcher here, tight end, wide receiver, maybe a big time running back. I'm kind of open to any of it.
Yeah, last year, one of the big themes is the veteran running backs who were traded to better situations. Barkley, Henry, Jacobs, they all escaped situations where you really couldn't win at all. And then they went to, Barkley, Offensive Player of the Year, wins the Super Bowl. Henry lived in the red zone, the end zone for that great Ravens team, maybe the best team in the AFC. Jacob's so happy to get out of the Raiders. Is there a player like that who they can add? Because, I think we're at the end of the Gus Edwards usefulness. He probably wasn't even useful in 2024. And even off a comeback season from Dobbins, he's with his build and his history. If he does come back, you never feel like you're safe long term. I'd love to see them make. I want to see one more impact receiver. And I realize every team has tons of needs. Maybe the Chargers were a year ahead of schedule with this Harbaugh rebuild, but they need a running back with some juice. And they need, as great as McConkey is, you need another impact receiver, especially somebody who can play more outside. Not that McConkey can't, but he's better utilized in the slot. I'd love to see them find a really intriguing X receiver in maybe the second round.
Yeah, that's kind of, I see them as a second round. I don't have their draft picks up off the top of my head, but they do have a boatload of cap room, but there's not like a lot of X receivers available on the market. I wonder if maybe they could be a Devontae Adams team. I know he wants to play on the West Coast. He would make sense as a guy that could play X, but could also slide into the slot to do some stuff with Lad McConkey. I don't know, man. I'm taking Lad really high next year. I don't really care who they add. I don't think they will add somebody to the level. I mean, maybe Adams would get me to change my mind, but I doubt they end up adding somebody to the level of like that is going to supplant McConkey as the number one here. But I do think an addition is coming.
Yeah, the last Yahoo mock draft that Tyson, Charles McDonald have been doing, had Egbuka going to the Steelers, but that's just one pick ahead of the Chargers. I mean, could that make sense if he somehow falls, or maybe even the Chargers move up to get him?
Maybe. I've started that the Ohio State receiver. I think he might be like a slot only guy. So we'll see.
I've heard different opinions on him on whether or not he's really somebody who can play outside the numbers. So obviously the Ohio State receiving factory, and maybe I'm just conditioned to look at these Ohio State guys and expect them to be great. Please let's let Chris Olave have a healthy season next year. I know he's going to be a great player someday, but I realized last year McLaurin had the dream season and JSN really got going in the second half. Wilson was in a losing situation and Olave couldn't stay healthy, but I'm just conditioned where I see these receivers and man, they got some good ones coming back. I mean, wait till a couple of years from now. We'll be talking a lot about Ohio State receivers, but I think there's a first rounder coming from the Buckeyes this year.
Two things. Funny you did all of that. I don't think I heard you mention Marvin Harrison Jr., who was an Ohio State wide receiver.
You go to Ohio State? You sure about that?
Yeah, pretty sure.
You're confusing him with Jamison Williams, who was at Ohio State for like 15 minutes.
That's what it was. That's what I'm confusing him with. Second thing, perfect transition to the guy who used to throw the football to a lot of those players. Houston Texans are our next team here. I don't want to talk too much about the Texans because we'll hit on some of this with Nico Collins in the interview, but I'm just curious your temperature check on this team, Scott. My question for this is basically, will a new offense get the talent back on track? Nick Caley is the new offensive coordinator. I'm a little intrigued with this hire too.
Yeah, Nick Caley, right, from the Sean McVay passing room, and he was a tight end coach under the Bill Belichick staff going back a decade or so. I think he's a really interesting hire. We talked about Slowick's career is kind of falling apart over the last 12 months. I wish him the best with whatever he ends up doing, but they need
passing
to
game coordinator in Miami, I think.
Okay, is that where he is? Okay,
that's
interesting.
That's interesting. Obviously, they have the San Francisco connection there, but hopefully
for sure,
pick up
for
some
sure.
new ideas.
For some reason, I missed that when I was tracking the coaches. Obviously, there's already been a lot of coaching movement in the NFL.
Buddy, if you missed the Bobby Slowick hire, I'm gonna let you off I'll give you a pass on that one.
The problem is I was trying to cleanse my palate from what was going on with the Bobby Slowick offense last year, so maybe mentally I blocked that. But
fair.
They need to get Stroud's mojo back and his confidence back. And when your offensive line collapses the way their offensive line collapses, it just eventually you start seeing ghosts, right? Greg Cosell always talks about, first the pressure gets to you, and then you're afraid that this pressure that really isn't there, and that starts getting to you, and you start making bad decisions. He did have a good 3 quarters, Stroud did, against the Chargers, and then it kind of fell apart against the Chiefs the next week. But is Nick Caley? You never know. I mean, who's the next Liam Cohen? Maybe it's Nick Caley, right? Who's the next Dave Canales? Maybe it's Nick Caley. This is a hire they had to get right, and because he's been at McVay's feet for the last couple of years, I think it's a really. And again, I'm really interested to hear what Nico Collins has to say, and he's somebody I will certainly draft proactively next year, no matter what. But Caley hopefully they got the offensive coordinator right, because I realized with the injuries last year, they probably had a losing hand and made the playoffs anyway. Somehow Joe Mixon was productive despite the offensive line playing so poorly. But losing Diggs just about all season, losing Dell just about all season, it sounds like he may not play next year either. I still believe in CJ Stroud. At the end of the day, I still believe CJ Stroud. Maybe we were over our skis with he's like a quasi MVP candidate, but I got to believe he's still one of the 10 most important people at that position.
I agree. I'm still really high on Stroud, and I actually think moving away from some of just the straight Shanahan concepts can be good for him. So I'm really really curious to see what Caley brings to the table here. I'm going to kind of loop these next two teams together, Scott, because I have literally the same question for both the Ravens and the Bills, which is, do we see any major personnel changes on offense, specifically at the skill position players for both of these teams? For Baltimore, their outstanding questions are mostly on the offensive line, where Ronnie Stanley's a free agent and Patrick McCarry is a free agent. Stanley's going to be interesting just because of the injuries, but he's coming off of a great year, but he's into his 30s. Other than that, their skill position group is set. Other than maybe a Mark Andrews cut. I'm curious to hear your opinion on that. And then same with the Bills too. Let's just stick on the Ravens before we get to the Bills, just for the sake of clarity here. Like I mentioned, those are kind of the outstanding questions for them. But otherwise, Derrick Henry's back, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, those guys are back. They can borrow from the Lamar bank to get more cap room, stuff like that. Do you see any major personnel additions coming for the Baltimore Ravens?
I don't. And it's just amazing that Lamar Jackson's best season was not an MVP season. Maybe there's a little bit of voter fatigue because Jackson was the AP quarterback, but he wasn't the MVP. And those people, the same people voting, doesn't completely make sense to me. But I think Baltimore right now, they can't say this in public. I think they're probably thinking, man, we had the best team in the AFC. We didn't get to the Super Bowl. We needed some of those early. How did they ever lose to the Raiders in week 2? They didn't get to the win total that made sense, so they had to go on the road to play Buffalo, all that stuff. But man, they're going to Super Bowl next year. It's got to be coming. I can't believe Lamar Jackson and this core is not going to go to a Super Bowl. And I realize, this history's full of these stories, right? I mean, only one for Rodgers, only one for Breeze. Marino didn't win a title. It's just they don't hand these things away at the airport. But if I'm Baltimore, I'm like, you're just a little bit unlucky last year. I would run as much of it back as possible. The interesting questions are the age guys, because Andrews is getting really close to the end of his relevancy, and Isaiah Likely is obviously ready for a bigger role. I realize there are different types of tight ends, but so I wouldn't be shocked if they did something with Andrews. But for the most part with Baltimore, I'd say you're on the right path. Just try to do as much as you did last year and get a little bit luckier in the win column.
Yeah, maybe they add a third receiver somewhere along the way in the offseason. But for the most part, I do think that I think Andrews is the big question there. And I obviously Likely would be a very highly coveted fantasy tight end if Andrews was to move on. And he has no guaranteed money left on his deal. They'd save about $11 million in cap, take about just about $6 million in dead money. So totally doable there for them if they want to move on from Andrews. But we know Lamar loves Mark Andrews, and I think he probably is going to have a lot of sway in terms of whether he's back or not. And really, it is just the offensive line. They got to try to figure out what they're going to do with Ronnie Stanley there because he would be a tough guy to replace.
It is frightening how great Lamar Jackson is right now.
Yeah.
He was amazing last year. The tape, the stats, no matter how you want to break it down, how you want to look at it, how granular you want to get, how stat nerdy you want to get, how scouty you want to get. I can't break down tape the way you can or Nate Tice can, but I can appreciate that this was a guy just totally in command of his game. And I'm going to make sure I'm not somebody who drafts quarterbacks early. I'm going to make sure I'm going to have at least one share of Lamar Jackson next year. There's no way I'm being shut out of that in 2025.
The other thing that really links these two teams together, by the way, we'll transition to the Bills here, is that, what a coup, the fact that the Ravens brought Todd Monken back. The Bills are bringing Joe Brady back. They have these two quarterbacks that were in the MVP discussion. Obviously, Allen ended up winning it. And both the coordinators are back. That's huge. Monken's a guy who might never end up getting an HC job, which is unfair, but just age, stuff like that, and maybe some of it's just not what owners want to sell right now, which maybe again is stupid, whatever. But Brady is a guy that I definitely think could get a HC job at some point. But he is back this year. And again, similar question for Buffalo. Do you see any major personnel changes coming here? Amari Cooper's a free agent. There's no chance he's back with this team after not really making a big impact after the in-season trade. But other than that, Khalil Shakir, the tight ends are under contract. Curtis Samuel's under contract. Matt Collins, maybe they want to bring him back on another cheap deal. Keon Coleman's in house. Do they make a move for like a true number one wideout? Also worth noting that in terms of their offensive line, they have a lot of continuity at that spot as well.
They have to look in the mirror. This wide receiver room is not good enough. I realize they got unlucky with Cooper because he hurt his wrist the moment they added him. So he really wasn't the player we expected. The last time he had traded midseason from the Raiders to the Cowboys, he was fine. So I don't think it's like Amari Cooper couldn't pick up the offense or anything. I don't think he was healthy, and they just had to play who their best players were. They like a rotation at receiver anyway. I like Shakir for what he is. Obviously, Coleman's entering his second season, so he could get better. I think they wouldn't say this in public. They had to be disappointed that Dalton Kincaid had a really kind of a washout second season.
Yeah.
You cannot ask, and I realize Allen just won the MVP. You can't ask Josh Allen to make it work with this group. You need to add
in the AFC Championship, won the MVP. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, but the results were obviously great.
They have a bunch. They have a bunch of guys who they're asking to play a slot above what they are. Matt Collins is a great support player. Curtis Samuel can do some nice things. Another Ohio State guy, by the way. I still broke my heart with one of the most crazy one side of the field to the other side of the field runs against Michigan, a game that was like a million years ago that I can still picture in my mind. Maybe Coleman, of course, was a basketball player. He changed schools in college, which is not uncommon now. So maybe he was always going to be somebody you didn't expect. I think people a lot of thought that, okay, Keon Coleman's like a project. He's like a year 2, year 3, year 4 guy. So maybe they can coach him up. But they have to look at, and this is a team where I talked about maybe not wanting to get invested in some older receivers. With Buffalo's window, if they could get a player who's just going to be good next year and you don't really know what you're getting in 26 or 27, get somebody on a pillow contract or get somebody who might be back 9, but there's still a plus season left, they should be interested in guys like that because they got to give Josh Allen more help. He needs one, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be a 1, although I would love it if it is, but yeah. They can't run back this wide receiver room. That is not good enough.
Yeah. Hey, maybe they bring Stephon Diggs back.
It's funny you say that. I'd at least call and take his temperature. Why not?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a burned bridge.
Probably, but why? Josh Allen's a persuasive guy. Josh Allen's one of those guys that you meet him, and it's like he's the most compelling guy in the room, and he just people want to play for that guy. I know it sounds like no chance, and Diggs would never want to go back there, and Buffalo's probably mad about the way the divorce happened. But you know what? I'd send him a text message, or I'd send him a call, or if I was Josh Allen, I'd be like, "Hey man, hey buddy, let's just have a beer, or just have a steak or something, or play a round of golf, and just talk about life."
It's worth a call. It's worth a call. I would be shocked. I do think Devontae Adams, though, this could be an Adams team.
Yes. I talked about a guy who might just have that one impactful season left. Yeah, why not? Devontae Adams, age 33 season. Most teams wouldn't make sense. Buffalo? I think he makes a lot of sense. I've tried to think of who the right guy would be. I think Devontae Adams makes a ton of sense for this team.
Because they need somebody that can play outside. Like as much as I like the Godwin types, whatever, and that's probably not what they're looking for. Because Khalil Shakir is a slot guy. Keon Coleman's a player I don't want to see taking as many snaps at X receiver as he took last year. I actually think they could maybe if they think Coleman's, I'm not saying he's not tough, but if he's really down to do like the dirty work that Matt Collins did last year, I think there's a lot of connective tissue to those two players and things like that. And then, just one guy who to man that X receiver spot, but also move around a little bit. That would be a natural fit to me. But they got to figure out their cap situation because they're probably going to cut Von Miller. They could probably just borrow or extend to Josh Allen. But they could find the money for it, but that's probably the one guy on the open market that makes sense to me.
There's probably no way for it financially to make sense.
Probably.
But I would call Seattle and ask about DK Metcalf. I would just take their temperature.
Yeah. Metcalf's the guy that we'll talk about on the next episode in the NFC questions. So I think that's a big one there. All right, final team to talk about here. And look, we've talked about the Chiefs a lot because they were just in the damn Super Bowl. But I think the conclusion coming out of the Super Bowl was that there's a lot that the Chiefs need to do in the offseason, specifically for our purposes in fantasy here, Scott. I think the big question is, do they put more effort into attacking the offensive line or skill position weaknesses? Because I think they're weak. Really, you could justify anything. What do you think happens here?
Yeah, well, we've been here before, right? I mean, the Tampa Bay, Kansas City Super Bowl was so similar to what we just saw, where Tampa Bay dominated the game with their front four, and Mahomes was just under duress the entire game and looked so Patrick Mahomes, not like the player we're used to. But the receiver room's going to be fine. I don't know if Rashee Rice has suspension time coming down the road, but he was looking like a true alpha before he got hurt. And at least the injury was so early in the season that you would hope that he'd have a healthy 2025. And Worthy was spreading his wings. Probably cost himself a round of draft value after having a really big Super Bowl, including that garbage time touchdown that made some people happy. Significant to some, as SVP might say. So I think they can go back. They're going to want, look, there's a lot of moving pieces here. That the Brown thing didn't work out. He got hurt. He's probably not coming back. Hopkins may not have anything left. He was hurt most of last season. They need to offensive line first. And we'll figure out, Pacheco was a late round pick. They took Kareem Hunt basically off the street and got some mileage out of him. They know you can ham and egg it at running back. And they've had some hits and misses with what they've tried to ham and egg it at receiver. I think Kelsey might retire. It's probably a 50-50, but this offensive line is not good enough. They somehow MacGyvered their way through all those one-score wins, and they only lost 2 games until the Super Bowl. That was incredible. They outkicked their coverage. They were not the best team in the AFC, but they still went to the Super Bowl. But they cannot look Patrick Mahomes in the eye and say, "Yeah, we're going to run it back with this offensive line." That is their priority. That's priority 1 and priority 2.
Yeah, offensive line first and foremost, 100% agree with you there. I do think we see a running back added at some point in the offseason, probably a rookie to maybe battle with Isaiah Pacheco. I think they need one more guy in the skill position, at the wide receiver position specifically. I don't think it needs to be like a number 1 or anything like that. It doesn't have to be a massive swing, but somebody that can play on the perimeter and allow Worthy and Rice to be. And Rice, I don't think you can fully count on Rashee Rice this year. That's an injury that might linger into the season, and then he has a suspension looming over him. I think you got to kind of view it without him in the mix. And then if he's in there, great, you're even better. But even if he is out there, I think you still want him moving around the formation. You still want Worthy moving around the formation. So one perimeter player, I think, is a must add this offseason at some point.
And I think another thing that really hurt them is just Kelsey is so compromised as a blocker right now that, he was never in that Gronkowski class as a blocker, or George Kittle. I always think that Rob Gronkowski and George Kittle would have been Hall of Fame offensive linemen. I don't feel exactly the same way about Kelsey, who's obviously one of the greatest tight ends who ever lived, and we'll talk about his legacy when he does retire. But the fact that he's no longer an impact blocker, I think, has hurt this offense as well.
All right, Scott. Appreciate you, buddy. This was awesome. Thank you for being here. I know you are deep in baseball season, so things are happening for your end. Appreciate the hell out of you. We are going to toss to our final break, and on the other side, Nico Collins. Man, Nico Collins is here to talk with us right after this. Absolutely thrilled now to be joined by Texans star receiver Nico Collins. Nico, what's going on, man?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be talking to you, man. People that listen to my show, watch my stuff, they know I'm a huge fan of your game.
That's love.
So
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you, man. Let me tell you what, you have made me look smart over the years. So I want to take you back to kind of your early days in Houston, because the reason that I was gravitated to you as a player was, so what I do is I go in and I chart the film. I chart the routes, where you're lining up, the whole thing. And I'm watching you early on in your career, and I'm like, I know the production's not there yet for this guy, but he is playing at a really high level. So can you kind of take me through your early days to kind of your ascension the last 2 years?
I feel like when I first started, it was one of those, I was dealing with a lot of injuries. Just so I was trying to find my routine, just trying to find my groove, coming into, the league is different, everybody's good, learning football, learning the offense, new OC, just getting adjusted. And I feel like my first 2 years was a lot of up and down just due to injuries. And then I feel like my third year, I kind of realized this for me, I need to realize my teammates need me. I need to be there for the team, man, and take care of my body. And I feel like once I did that, I took off. So I feel like just finding, routines, finding out what worked out for me, asking, older guys in the building, I had Brandon Cooks there, asking him questions, things like that, like how you take care of your body, just having them guys to lean on, I feel like that really helped me out for my third year. And we ended up getting CJ, ended up getting, a couple, Will Anderson, a lot of draft picks, D'Amico, ended up getting Bobby Slow, just a lot of great pieces adding to the organization, man. I feel like that's what we needed. And we ended up taking off, man. And I ended up having 2 great years, and blessed for that. I want to continue to grow, continue to, prevail up.
100%. Yeah, I mean, you hit on it right there. The reason I do what I do is it's like hard to isolate wide receiver play with any stats. It's all about like the situation and the ecosystem. So these last 2 years in Slowick's offense with CJ Stroud, can you kind of just talk about your connection with CJ and where you guys you think best link up?
Yeah, I feel like our connection got deeper once he got there. He was a rookie, but when he came in, didn't seem like a rookie. And just I feel like our bond got closer with the receivers, the tight ends, just the running backs, the skill. When we first came in at the OTAs, we ended up taking the trip to Cali, just throw a little bit where the bond got tighter. We getting the timing down pat, so when we come into camp, fall camp, we clicking. So I feel like just our connection just grew throughout camp and throughout the season, it just grew. Every day after practice, we stayed back. If something didn't work, just get routes, just little things like that. And I feel like as you continue to do that, the connection it's easy, you don't really think about it.
Another reason why I was, again, really gravitated to your skill set is because you play the X receiver position, which for the people that don't know that, you're on the line of scrimmage. Yeah, you're backside, you're on the line of scrimmage, you're dealing with top like press coverage, and I mean for the stuff that I'm doing, you're like one of the best press man beaters in the NFL. So can you kind of tell people what goes into playing that position and how it's maybe different than other spots on the field?
So a lot going into playing the X receiver. I feel like your backside, pretty much that's a primary position. A lot of your start corners are backside. That's pretty much like that position where your top corners guard. And I feel like that's where your bigger receivers are. Most, So I feel like for me, man, just playing that position it's kind of tough, because you see the best of the best. That's what you want to go against, and it's kind of different from the slot. A slot guy moves around a lot. X receiver, kind of more stationary. He on the outside of the most. So I feel like for me, man, just going against guys like Derek Stingley every day in practice, Kamar. Guys like that, man, every single day, like
trial by fire.
Man, you have no choice but to get better. Iron sharpen iron. That's one of the 2 best corners in the league, and just going against them every day. Just seeing how I can get off press. What am I doing too much? I know I'm a bigger body, but maybe I can.
They like that answer.
Yeah, I love that. Let's go. But maybe I can move faster. Just less movement in that position, knowing I'm a bigger frame. I feel like that's the things I've been working on.
100%. So like I said, I chart routes, everything like that. I got a little graphic I'm going to show you. But I want to hear from you, and I'm going to tell you if I think you're right. What do you think is your best route that you run?
Best route? A dagger, like an in cut.
That was the exact right answer. I mean, that is 100% what I was going to say. So tell me why you like that. What's so good about it?
Because I can run deep. I have great speed. I can really outrun you. So I feel like if you come off the ball fast, everybody gonna think it's a go ball. 100%. And I feel like once you put your foot in the ground and just come like at a negative angle, like fast, it's unguardable. And I'm just being a bigger target and just moving. The way I move it's kind of hard to stop. And I feel like for me, you got to continue to grow, continue to do the things that made you be successful. Continue to work on that route. Work on the other routes. And not just be a vertical receiver. That's one guy I really didn't want to be just a vertical downfield. I wanted to open up my bag, open up my routes. Show guys like I run routes, different routes. Being a taller receiver. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm still climbing, still growing 100%. On my game and having fun with it.
Yeah, sinking those hips at the break point of it and just dusting corners. It's great to see. Last thing for you, it is changing the offensive system now. You got Nick Caley's coming as the offensive coordinator.
Sir.
Maybe some of the same language because they kind of come off the same tree. But is there anything you're looking to maybe do more of in this offense that maybe you didn't get to do in the previous one?
No, not really. I feel like just continue to be there for my teammates, continue to make plays, man. I feel like my last 2 years, I've been pretty productive. I'm blessed, happy about that, man. I got to continue to grow, continue to find the things I need to work on individually. Stay on the field, man. Work on my body. It's a long season. You got to, work on the small things. and I just continue to, thank God for everything.
Yeah. Actually, one more thing for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you could.
Tell the people about Tank Dell, man, because I was saying it with you in your third year and him as a rookie.
Yes, sir.
Some of the best route combinations in the NFL was you on those deep in breakers and him on those deep out breaking routes.
Unguardable.
Dealing with an injury now, another one. It's really unfortunate. But can you just kind of tell people about like what type of worker he is?
Man, he's a hard worker, man. I feel like just everybody's in our building, man, is our dogs. And I feel like we're like dogs that's trying to get better every day. That's not satisfied. And Tank, man, he's one of them. And just his work ethic every day, man. He always, first one there, last one, always, trying to get better, on the field last, finding ways to better his game, and it shows every day, just to see him go down, man, it really hurt the teammates, hurt brothers, hurt me, just to see his work go in, man, and just go down so quick, what I'm saying? Like, it's football, stuff happen like that, it's free accidents, but you don't want to see one of your brothers go down like that, man. But I'm glad he's on the rise, mental good, and just got to continue to be there for him, attack his rehab, and continue to be in his corner.
Hopefully we see you guys balling at your peaks again, man. Appreciate your time, Nico.
Sure.
Thanks so much
no
for
doubt.
joining me.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you again to both Scott and Nico Collins, elite guys in their field. Scott, an elite fantasy analyst, and Nico Collins, an elite wide receiver in the NFL. Fantastic show here with both of those gentlemen. That is going to do it for today. We'll be back on Tuesday next week. Dalton Del Don joins me to identify 16 fantasy questions for all 16 of the NFC teams. And also, I'll share my sit down with Lions running backs David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs at the Super Bowl. Until then, we are out.